Hey, happy Monday.
Happy Monday. How you doing, Joe?
Doing fine. How are you?
Doing well. Did you have a good weekend?
Yeah, it was pretty nice. Pretty mundane. Just went climbing and stuff. How about you?
Yeah, the same. I was actually spending some time studying for a Snowflake certification, incidentally. I
Oh,
guess this has
nice.
been in the works for a while, but it certainly lines up nicely with the Snowflake IPO this week. So
Yeah, sure thing. Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, I took the exam on the IPO day, actually. It was kind of funny.
it's good
In the
timing. Yeah,
morning, trying to
lots of
buy
questions.
Snowflake stock while getting ready for an exam and then taking the exam for about an hour and then wondering what happened to the stock price. So
Yeah,
that was
that's
that
pretty
was nice.
insane, right? I
Oh
mean,
man, it was totally insane. Yeah,
yeah.
I figured I'd get in at the initial offering price, and yeah, it had more than doubled by that point. So, but
Yeah.
I think it's an interesting time for the cloud data market. I think Snowflake was definitely a bellwether of hopefully some great things to come for not just Snowflake, but other companies as well in the space. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as we've discussed a lot, companies like Google and Facebook built their business on data, right? Like PageRank was this big breakthrough in search algorithms, but PageRank only worked well when you could scale it up to massive amounts of data. So you
Mhm.
had Google building these internal data systems, Facebook building huge internal data systems, and also participating in open source projects. And so, in some sense, we're seeing a reflection of that enthusiasm in this IPO.
Yeah, totally agree. And it's interesting too, looking at sort of the waves of the general market. Snowflake's gotten a lot of attention. I mean, their go-to-market, I think, was just spot on.
Mhm.
I mean, from day one, I mean, it was like if you wrote a playbook on how to IPO a data company, like they hit everything, I would say, about perfectly in that regard. So it's interesting seeing, it's kind of an interesting thought experiment to see, okay, so like, where's the market going to go, after this, since this has happened, um, can we look to the past to get any guides, or, is this sort of a, new days for data? It's interesting scenarios.
Right. And it's interesting. I mean, you were talking about some of the numbers. What were you saying that the data warehouse market in like 2017 was valued at what, $18 billion a year or something like this?
Yeah, the numbers vary, but it
Yeah.
was, yeah, around that. I think by
Depending on who
now
you
it's
cite.
it was like an 8% growth rate, so it would be like some low 20s right now. But it's interesting of how much of the market is there to be captured, right? I mean, Snowflake's
Right.
valuation alone is probably at least triple that
Depending
number.
on the day.
So
Yeah.
depending on the day,
It
yeah.
was about
So
60 billion when I just checked. Peaked at over
yeah,
80 last week. Yeah.
and that's just them. So let alone everybody else out there who's
Yeah.
competing in the same
Exactly.
spaces, because you have data lakes, you have still on premises as well. You have the incumbent clouds with all their similar offerings, with data warehousing and data lakes. So it's interesting to see, like, kind of how, on one hand, how like uh, I guess fragmented the market still is. There's not really like a clear leader per se,
Right.
in either data warehousing or the data lake market. There's not the Kleenex of that space yet. So, but as data becomes more important, it's going to be very fascinating to see, like, if this shakes out to being a handful of incumbents. And then when you have incumbents, it's exciting to think, okay, so who's going to come up from behind and totally sideswipe all the incumbents, like, which is always happens in technology. So
Well, especially in this data space, I mean, we've seen just leaps and bounds of technological development in the data warehouse space and the data lake space in the last 10 years. I mean, 5 years ago, Hadoop was still cool. And then a few years after that, it was Spark. And I think Spark is still cool to some extent, but it's not like the hot new thing on the block anymore.
mm-mm.
And surely we'll see new big frameworks coming out in the next couple of years that will just kind of wipe the floor with the existing ones.
Oh yeah, that's you can. I won't even bet money on that.
Yeah, that's
It's just
almost certain to happen.
it's like a tautology. What what
Right.
what what is interesting too is, and the so it's an interesting thing with the um the closed source vendors, right?
Right.
So, you know, your AWS's with Redshift, Synapse with Azure, BigQuery, with Google, and then Snowflake in the data warehousing space, cloud data warehousing space. And I guess there's others out there that are up and coming. But then, you know, on the open source side, you have like Presto, and I think it's interesting how they're positioning themselves. It's like, you know, more as a way to connect all your data together into one hub, you know, versus maybe competing head to head with a data warehouse or a data lake.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be a very important space in the future. I think what we're going to find is that companies won't have one data system to rule them all. We'll continue to see a number of different data systems operating in any organization. And so integration is going to become a bigger and bigger play in the future. I mean, I think in the past when things are on-prem, you probably had somewhat fewer data assets. Maybe you had like an Oracle transactional system and a Teradata EDW system, but in the cloud, it's so easy to spin up these assets, and they have very specific nice characteristics that you might want for different projects, that we'll see companies with like 5 different data systems that are kind of used across different projects and use cases. And so someone needs to like stitch all those together so that you can have visibility across all of them.
Yeah, yeah, and that could be Presto. It could be something else. You
Even
know,
schema
and
management, cataloging, all
schema
these
action, big
problems are
one.
huge.
Yeah, and then of course, you know, we're mainly talking about batch systems, but then, you know, our friends over at Druid and Imply, I mean, they're working on, you know, enhancing the data river. So
Which
there's, you
is,
know,
it's basically Lambda architecture that's managed for you, which means it does rely on batch, right? Like you get better performance out of batch systems, but it also has a streaming layer so that you can query all of that data at the same time without thinking about the details of how you're doing it. Yeah,
yeah. And I would expect
especially.
that a lot of these systems are going to move more towards real time. I mean, everything is, I mean, if you can do it with events, then why do it in batch? I mean, it wouldn't make any sense in my opinion. So
Exactly. Like you bring in the events in your streaming system and then you kind of compact them into a columnar database behind the scenes, but the user doesn't have to think about those details, and they can get, you know, up to the second visibility into what's going on with their data while also doing year over year comparisons with, again, without having to write separate SQL queries and then run them across 2 different systems.
yeah, yeah. And there's still the elephant in the room still is, you know, how to apply, you know, AI to to these systems as well. It's I say this somewhat jokingly because, you know, AI is the elephant in the room of any conversation these days, and I, you know, a bit of a contraire, and I think that a lot of people still aren't able to even get historical looking, you know, batch analytics correct, let alone, you know,
Right.
predictive or prescriptive done correctly with batch with AI. So, but that's coming, whether, you know, we have an opinion on it or not. I think that there's, you know, the trajectory is there where um, hopefully these systems won't just be analytical systems for backward looking data, but there'll be more of a prescriptive element as well. You know, whether that's tacked on through um, you know, third-party modules as they kind of are right now, or whether that's baked into the systems going forward, I think remains to be seen. And then how does it integrate into the rest of the enterprise as well? That's another big question.
Right.
Right now, it's mainly have to tack on dashboarding and, you know, other third-party tools. And, you know, so just as there's probably no one data system to rule them all, is there not one analytics or AI framework to rule them all when it comes to, you know, this paradigm that we're entering with disparate systems, consolidating data, you know, and trying to make sense of it all.
Yeah, I think the overall point is the space is moving so fast that Snowflake is going to have to move really fast too to continue justifying that valuation. I think any company that gets at all complacent risks getting left behind. And so, of course, it's
Mm-hmm.
important to invest in sales and marketing, but you got to be investing a lot in R&D and just delivering what the users really need to gain insights from their data in a very low friction way. So obviously you want SQL, but like you're saying, you want more automation to just extract data and insights very quickly without having to write a huge amount of code.
Well, to share the data too, right? And I think that's where
Yeah.
Snowflake did a fantastic job is, um, you know, really pitching the idea that data isn't just something that is within your organization, but it's something to be shared with other organizations and other accounts. And like that's, I think, a pretty killer feature as well. And you see other companies starting to embark on this. I mean, BigQuery actually had this feature for quite a while, but
In fact, it was
just,
designed around that, right? If you read
yeah.
BigQuery, the definitive guide, that was the original idea that drove the development of that as a public-facing database, is data sharing. Yeah, and I think, I mean, data sharing has been around for a while through APIs for me. What would you say, like 10 years or more? But the
Or
reality
at
is that
least.
sharing data, but that's high friction, right? That means that I have to have developers, they have to like query those APIs, download the data, and then it's like, okay, now that I've pulled that data, what do I do with it? Well, then I have to usually load it into some other system like Hadoop or some big data system or SQL-based system. And so, yeah, databases like Snowflake and BigQuery that let you query that data in place, basically, and then join between different data sets. That's a very, very powerful paradigm. It's like a huge
Yeah,
extension of the traditional data warehouse, where that is just an isolated pool of resources that doesn't really connect very effectively to anyone else's resources.
for sure. What I liked about what Snowflake did too is like sharing with as a first class citizen. It's not like you have
Mhm.
to do anything special. I mean, it's literally an icon in the main menu. You just
Right.
hit sharing, share a data set, and then give it the account you want to share it with. Or
Yeah.
that's awesome. And I hope that sharing becomes more of a first class citizen in other platforms. I know that like AWS, for example, is making some really big waves right now with trying to get data sharing to be more first class in their data stack as
Right.
well. So I think it's good. What I like is that a company like Snowflake came out of nowhere and put the industry on notice. I mean,
Right.
it's caused all of our partners. Full disclosure, we partner with Amazon, we partner with Snowflake, GCP, Imply, Qubel, and many others at this point. And so it's not like we have a dog in the fight either way. But what is really cool is I think Snowflake really did come out of nowhere and like forced everyone to level up.
And they're
You
messaging those
know,
features, right? I mean, to be quite frank, data sharing is also first-class citizen BigQuery. All I have to do with my table is just grant someone permissions, and they can query the data. But I don't think Google has done a great job of messaging that to customers or potential customers. So they could really do a better job of saying, "Hey, look, a lot of these capabilities we've had for a long time too."
yeah,
And
it could be
Snowflake has just
better.
done a great job of like getting that message out in the public and partnering with other companies like Adobe that are interested in a data sharing use case, and just their sales marketing organization have really communicated this effectively. And so that's part of the reason for the valuation. I mean, I think sometimes tech people like me sort of reject marketing as unsavory, but hey, marketing is communication. I think honest, good communication can really help companies to improve their data practices.
Oh yeah. And at the end of the day, if you're a business, what does matter is also, are you able to sell, right?
Yep.
And
Yeah.
again, Snowflake's done a fantastic job going out there in the market and selling. I mean, the year-over-year revenue growth has been phenomenal. And again, it's, um, you know, it'll be an interesting challenge for, I think, a lot of our partners in the
Mhm.
respect that in one hand, marketing is definitely about messaging and communication. On the other hand, you don't want to get into the better trap where you're just fighting feature on feature, right? You
Right.
want to carve out your unique space in the marketplace and really fight there. Because if you're fighting a feature for feature, it's a loser's battle
Right.
either way. And I think all of our partners have fantastic technologies, and they're all different. That's the cool thing. It's not like you know we can make a case where you can run Spark and BigQuery in the same account, and I think that they're two different technologies.
But they have different use
Or like
cases.
Druid
Yeah.
and BigQuery, for example. It's another
Yeah.
one that's totally, and both work just great. So, um, but yeah, it's been a fascinating week in the data space for sure. Curious to see
And
what
I,
else happens.
yeah, and I think, 2021 and the rest of 2020 are going to be pretty fascinating for data as well, frankly. And we're, from the perspective of Snowflake, I think this IPO not only has minted a lot of new billionaires, but it's also going to drive more data adoption, right? Everyone who has an old on-prem data warehouse is now going to start evaluating this technology and its competitors. And it's kind of a new phase of evangelism for big data warehousing, as we'd like to call it sometimes. Data
Yeah,
warehouses that just scale, that behave like a data lake in many respects.
for sure, and it's going to be interesting too, seeing like the sort of the incumbent on-prem data warehouse companies and data lake companies make the transition into cloud. I mean, my
Mhm.
opinion is they're probably a bit too late, and they're going to have to retrofit, a cloud native way of doing things into they're sort of older approaches. And of course, these vendors are going to tell you that, oh yeah, we've totally got this under control, and our systems are scalable, and are cloud native. Part of me, finds it a bit hard to believe, but we'll see how it goes.
The problem is they're facing kind of the classic innovator's dilemma. I mean, like Teradata does make a great product for what it is, but they have a two-phase transition they're trying to go through right now. So first of all, they've really struggled, from what I understand, to get customers off of their row-based data warehouse into the columnar data warehouse, because customers invested all this money into like really optimizing their row-based databases, and Teradata columnar just behaves differently. The schema is different. You don't have indexes suddenly. And then they talked a pretty good game on cloud, but they just haven't delivered. And when they do deliver, getting customers to make that transition won't necessarily be real easy. And the problem is that when it's time to make a huge transition, customers end up getting unlocked to some extent. It's like, well, if we're going to make that transition, then maybe we should just evaluate the data warehouse system we're going to use. Do we want to stick with their data, or want to evaluate all these other options? And I think with so much excitement around Snowflake, they're going to grab a lot of that market share potentially. But we'll see. I'm interested to see what Teradata ends up doing, because I think they have a lot of really great and competent engineers. If they can figure out how to harness that and harness that technology, then they may do interesting things yet.
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot of companies in the same boat right now. Your Teradata's, your Cloudera's, Vertica's, and so forth, right? Then off to the side, you have all these other on-prem data warehouses that are built on like SQL Server, for example.
Right.
In our observations, that's actually, a lot of the data warehouse world is using a good old SQL Server relational databases for the data warehouse, and so I'll also be curious to see how many of those users end up transitioning to something like a Snowflake or maybe a Synapse or something like that, if they want to stay in Azure land. So.
Well, it's going to be interesting to watch that partnership between Microsoft and Snowflake and see how, if they remain aligned, if Microsoft kind of pushes customers towards Snowflake or tries to pull them back to more of their Microsoft native products.
Yeah, you had an interesting thought too, where at some point maybe Snowflake just builds its own cloud if there's some contention.
So one of the interesting things, if we get deeper into the tech discussion, one of Google's key advantages, which again, they could do a better job of touting, is their vertical integration. So BigQuery, one advantage it has is that they, in addition to owning like processing layer and software, they also own the underlying storage layer. And so they can push way more bandwidth than Snowflake can pull off of S3, because Amazon, it's just behind an API. Snowflake can't control the details of that storage cluster, and Google gets to do that. And so once you get into like terabytes and petabytes, BigQuery has an advantage in that respect. But yeah, maybe someday with the valuation that Snowflake has, especially, maybe it makes sense for them to have some of their own hardware at some point to say, hey, you can be on all the public clouds, but also if you want, you can be on this special cloud. And maybe there are some performance advantages to going that way if they have that deep level integration with the hardware. So
it would make a lot of sense.
About the valuation, what was the estimated valuation of AWS for all of AWS, the entire cloud, not any one product?
Oh, geez, what was that?
Like 250 billion or 300 billion or something.
I think anywhere from that number to like 500 is what I heard. So it's a pretty big range, but point being, it's, that's, that's a pretty sizable number. But again, that's, anywhere from 33 to 50% of the cloud market, depending on who you talk to. So that's believable, right?
Yeah, you're talking maybe Snowflake at one point was valued 15 to 20% of the estimated valuation of AWS, which is absolutely insane. So one data warehouse cloud vendor that doesn't own its own hardware is valued at that much of the entire cloud on AWS. So yeah, again, with that kind of valuation, maybe they're going to build their own cloud someday. We'll see.
Own cloud and probably other tooling is what I would expect, because that it's you'd have to take definitely an adjunct approach as well, where you start tacking on different pieces into your system, but then you build an ecosystem at that point. So it's fascinating to watch this, and I think hats off again to the Snowflake crew for very rapid success. Started in 2012, and here they are today. That's awesome. No matter what your opinion is of Snowflake as a technology or whatever, like hats off to the company for and people behind it for making a a very successful business in that short
Yeah.
amount of time. That is impressive. That's
And
so
going
cool.
against the major players, right? Because I think
Hmm.
BigQuery and Redshift came out around that time, within a couple of years of 2012. And so here you have, Google, which in my opinion, in general, has the best data technology in the world, although they've, again, done kind of a poor job sometimes of socializing that. And Amazon has amazing technology, and yet Snowflake was able to grow on top of these other public clouds and compete against the technology that these majors were delivering. That's amazing. Like a startup that could build that kind of technology.
Hmm. Yeah. And I see similar things for our other partners, more
Mhm.
of the pipeline partners, Fivetrans and Matillions. I think, they're also seeing a lot of success just being sort of like Switzerland in that way, right? So,
Right.
you're in all the clouds, and um, it's interesting because you set up a toll station sort of a model that way, and so.
Well, it goes back to what
But
we talked about when you're talking about Fivetran. Fundamentally, it's often not so much about the database as the data pipelines. Like companies just struggle
mhm.
to move the data in and transform it and make it coherent and make it clean and fix problems. And these third-party tools integrate with like Snowflake and BigQuery to fix those problems. And so it's going to be a very interesting ecosystem to watch. Let's just say that.
Oh yeah, yeah, for sure. Cool. I think it's a good place to end it. So
Yeah, we
yeah,
could talk all
well,
day, but we probably shouldn't. So
yeah, we could talk all day about this, and we do. So anyway, cool. Well, have a good one. We'll talk to you later.
yeah, you too. Take
All
care.
right.